Despite being perhaps the most successful franchise in cinema history, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has had its fair share of controversial outings over the years. Though let's face it, when a series has over 50 individual entries, it's pretty much a guarantee that not all of them are going to be smash hits. But one of their more notable controversies would have to be 2019's Captain Marvel. Now, I know many would say that this ship has long already sailed, and to continue talking about it is beating a dead horse, but most of the controversy surrounding the film didn't even have to do with the movie itself, and instead the real life circumstances surrounding it. And today, I'd like to take a deep dive into the movie Captain Marvel from an objective writing perspective and judge the film solely based on its own merits and nothing else. And normally I'd say there will be spoilers ahead, but considering just how big this movie was when it was released, I'm not even going to bother with that. Okay, so is Captain Marvel a good movie? That's the question trying to be answered here. And the answer to that is a surprisingly complicated one. Because on the one hand, it's not terrible. There are movies way worse than it out there, even within the MCU itself. But at the same time, it isn't great either, as it suffers from a lot of writing issues. Now listen, I'm not a professional writer, but I have actually written books, so I do know what narrative problems look like, and this movie has quite a few of them. And just to address the elephant in the room first, many have been quick to blame Brie Larson's performance for the film's faults, and while that is a problem, there's also a lot more to it than that. Now, to be perfectly blunt, I have nothing against Brie Larson. I think she's a terrific actress when given the right material and direction, but she was miscast in this movie. Because first of all, she's not Robert Downey Jr. or Mark Ruffalo. The quips constantly coming out of her mouth don't feel natural or all that funny, and she definitely does have a stoic problem in that her character is supposed to be very human, but doesn't really come across that way. However, there's a lot more to blame for this than just Larson herself. Because first of all, it's clear that Marvel got a little too confident with their signature style of humor and thought that they could just stick it into anything or have any character use it and that it would automatically work. And as later entries would show, this mentality would end up majorly backfiring on them. And it arguably started here. Because Nick Fury's more comical moments, for example, do work by contrast. But that's both because it fits his character better and because Samuel L. Jackson can be pretty funny when he needs to be. But even there, the movie ends up taking it too far by having what happens to his eye be very anticlimactic and used as a punchline when it should have been something serious to serve the character. So the point is, the humor in this movie is very hit or miss overall, but it's especially evident with Carol Danvers because Brie Larson isn't really that kind of actress, and the questionable material doesn't pick up the slack. And speaking of that, another major problem this movie has is that Carol Danvers is supposed to be going through an identity crisis for most of the film, and yet she never really feels as if she's questioning everything she ever knew. A lot of the time she just stands there with a blank expression and doesn't really look all that conflicted, when somebody in that frame of mind should be emotionally wrecked. I mean, just take a look at the scene where Monica is telling her, "You are Carol Danvers." Latana Lynch's performance is what makes the scene. She's the one doing all the heavy lifting and trying as hard as she can to sell the emotional stakes of that moment, while Brie Larson just stands there blankly. If it weren't for Lynch's performance, that scene would fall completely flat. Now, while Larson does deserve some of the blame for this, to be completely fair to her, the script isn't doing her any favors, as it doesn't give her much to work with when it comes to her identity crisis. I mean, just compare the amount of emotional anguish she goes through compared to Peter Parker in Spider-Man 2, because simply put, Parker spends 2/3 of the film going back and forth on what he should do, and how emotionally burdened he feels no matter what he decides. That's how somebody going through a crisis really looks and acts. And the fact that the movie leans so hard into it is what still makes it one of the best superhero movies ever made. And Captain Marvel doesn't have an ounce of that. When compared to Spider-Man 2, Carol's identity crisis feels completely half-hearted, since that is not how any real person goes through something so emotionally taxing. Now, some might argue that Carol barely emoting most of the time is intentional because she was taught by the Kree to repress her emotions. But here's the thing. Yon-Rogg, a model Kree soldier, emotes more than she does. And there's also how the entire movie is about Carol regaining her humanity. So she should be emoting quite a bit, both because she's shedding her Kree training and because she's finally embracing who she truly is again. So the fact that she doesn't really show much emotion half the time arguably subverts the entire point of the film, and not to mention makes it really hard to engage with her as a person. Seriously, one really does have to wonder if that was genuinely the best performance Brie Larson could give, or if the writers and director were specifically encouraging her to play the part that way, because no matter what, it doesn't work. And speaking of Yon-Rogg, that's another big issue, because he was honestly the perfect character to use as a personal threat to Danvers, and they completely squander him several different ways. Because first of all, not only does Carol ironically seem at her most human when she's interacting with him at the beginning, but she almost appears to be in love with him, and one almost can't help but suspect that the feeling is mutual. And had the film leaned more into that, then the audience would have felt the blow of his betrayal a lot harder, and not to mention would have made it a lot easier to empathize with Carol and what she subsequently goes through. There would have actually been a foundation that the audience can get behind for her crisis, which in turn would have probably made it easier for Larson to sell it as well. But the other problem is that, after wasting his potential for most of the film, the movie has one last chance to really use him to prove what Carol has learned, and once again just throws it away for the sake of a cheap joke. Because at the beginning of the film, as she's training with Yon-Rogg, she uses her powers against him in a physical match when he gains the upper hand on her to win. And he tells her that she can't use her powers to solve all her problems, and that she has to learn to depend on what she's naturally got. And throughout the movie, it almost appears as if he's right, since her powers only cause problems when she ends up on Earth, and it's through forming a friendship with Nick Fury and rediscovering Monica Rambeau that she gets the help she needs. But in the end, this potential lesson is subverted when she not only uses her powers to solve all her problems, but simply blasts Yon-Rogg away when he challenges her and says, "I don't need to prove anything to you." But the thing is, he may be the villain, but ultimately he's right. There will come a time when Carol can't use her powers or rely on them to solve a problem, as her adventure on Earth itself demonstrated, and when that time comes, she's gonna have no idea what to do, because throughout the movie she's been shown to rely on them like a crutch. So if she had actually defeated Yon-Rogg in a fair fight without her powers, not only would it have shown how she's grown since the beginning, but proved to the audience that she's learned not to depend solely on her powers for everything. But by just blasting him away again, it not only makes her look petty, but also that she's setting herself up for failure when the day inevitably comes that her powers can't save her, since she's never shown to be able to handle herself without them. In other words, while it may make sense from a logical standpoint that Carol wouldn't humor him when she clearly has the advantage, from a thematic standpoint it completely goes against what the character desperately needs to learn. Again, just because Yon-Rogg is the villain doesn't mean he's wrong about everything, and if she had actually beaten him in a fair fight, it would have said a lot more about her character, since it would show that she's more than her powers. But by doing to him, at the end, exactly exactly what she did at the beginning, all it shows is that she hasn't learned anything, rather than it serve an appropriate comeuppance for him. To put it simply, it's easy to see what they were going for with Jan Rog's character, but they didn't use any of what he had to offer to its full advantage, leaving him and what he represents feeling somewhat wasted with only Jude Law's performance to keep him from falling completely flat. And just as a side note, Jan Rog is supposed to be an ideal, emotionless kree, while Carol is supposed to have regained her humanity. So why is he the one throwing a tantrum at the end while she just stares at him blankly? Maybe just him losing it to such a degree that he forgets his training is one thing, but for both of them to be acting the opposite of how they should is honestly baffling, and indicates that this movie doesn't really know what it wants to say at the end of the day, with how much it's contradicting itself, because this is far from the only scene that's guilty of that. But getting back to Carol herself, one other issue with her is that the audience never gets to really know her as a person. Veers is very well explored and fleshed out, yes, but who is Carol Danvers? Who's the woman that we're supposed to be learning about alongside her? And the fact that we never get a definitive answer to that question is just another one of the movie's problems. Because again, the film is supposed to be about her undergoing this radical change after learning about who she really was, but by the end, she doesn't really feel too different from who she was at the beginning, and if anything, actually feels less human. Really, it almost feels as if the movie wants the audience to root for her just because she's the hero, and considering she does join the good guys and wants to do the right thing, that may be enough for some people. But as I keep saying, the problem is that Carol Danvers is pretty much a closed book for the entire runtime, so it's impossible to form a true connection with her. Honestly, the most the viewer gets is a montage of her constantly getting up after she's been knocked down, but even that doesn't work because it only comes right before the climax and has no foreshadowing connected to it. I mean, just compare that to Steve Rogers, because Captain America the First Avenger is all about showing us a man who will never give up no matter the odds stacked against him, and is always ready to do the right thing no matter what that entails or the personal risk to himself. So when he says, "I can do this all day," at the end, you feel the impact of that moment because you know he genuinely means it. He said that in an alley when he didn't even weigh 100 pounds against a thug that was ready to punch his face in. And when confronted by a madman ready to vaporize him, he stays true to his principles and repeats the same phrase without hesitation. That is how you build up a character. Now, sure, there is the fact that Carol had been shown to never back down from a challenge and always get back up throughout the movie. But the thing is, that's a standard superhero trait, and unlike Captain America, the audience isn't given a reason to see that as exceptional or her defining characteristic, since she's already more powerful than a standard Kree when the movie starts. So if anything, she already has the advantage, making her constantly getting up and fighting back a no-brainer rather than something to be truly impressed by. So the fact that the movie waits until the end of the film to show that this was something she always did even before she had powers fall completely flat. I mean, could you imagine if Captain America the First Avenger began right after he's injected with the serum and only have his backstory revealed via flashback as he's about to confront the Red Skull? Frankly, that alone would have ruined the entire movie because it would have thrown his character completely off. As generally in superhero movies, the viewer needs to see who the hero was before they became that way in order to understand who they really are all about and appreciate their heroic deeds. So right there, the whole amnesia angle was a risky one to take, but putting arguably the most important scene in the film right before the climax is what condemned it. Because if the film had been shown in linear order and let only Carol not be in the know as to who she was, then that alone would have probably made the movie better. Not perfect, obviously, but better. But like I stressed before, this isn't to say that the movie is terrible, as it does get enough things right to be considered enjoyable entertainment. Its story is one that can be followed and engaged with, if with some confusion, and the action scenes in particular are very well done. And it's also got its fair share of good characters, though mostly in the supporting roles with Nick Fury, Monica Rambeau, and Talos in particular making up for the problems Carol Danvers had. But while it does have its good points, most definitely, the point here is that from a more neutral, objective standpoint, Captain Marvel isn't a great film, and most of that actually comes down to the lead herself. Again, some people blame Brie Larson exclusively for that, but it was honestly the poor writing more than anything else that screwed up her character. Because as a writer myself, I can honestly say that the idea for this movie could have worked. Had they just toned down the humor a bit and got a better handle on who they wanted Carol Danvers to be, this could have easily been one of the better films in the MCU. But as for the movie we got, I'd say the fairest thing to call it is simply the middle of the road. Okay, that's everything I wanted to cover. So now I'd like to hear from all of you. Do you believe that, while not a train wreck, Captain Marvel wasn't a great movie due to mostly to its writing issues? Or do you believe it was perfect as is and that I was totally wrong in my criticism of it? Or alternatively, do you think I wasn't hard enough? Whatever the case, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And please understand that you are under no obligation to agree with this video just because you chose to watch it. You can feel absolutely any way you want to about Captain Marvel, both as a movie and character, and if you think I did them a complete disservice, that is totally fine. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate all of it, and I hope to see you all next time.